You're listening to the DFO Rundown podcast with Frank Seravalli and Jason Gregor on dailyfaceoff.com.
Welcome back to another edition of the DFO Rundown, episode number 12. I'm Jason Gregor, Frank Seravalli. With us as always, the Dirty Dozen today, Frank. How you doing?
6 weeks goes by fast.
It does. And of course, Fridays we've turned into a little bit of a talking about all that's going on around the NHL. We'll have some other, we might have to have Frank's food thought of the week. Anything that you cheated on this week, Frank? How's it going? We talked about it last week. So let's see. Have you dropped the LB or not? What's going on?
No, I have definitely not. Went out to dinner last night, got the old cheese fries appetizer, coupled with a little bloomin' onion at Outback Steakhouse. This is not a paid advertisement. Neither one of those two things, in addition to a 10-ounce steak, are gonna help the waistline. So yeah, nothing good to report. And I'd prefer if we never do a Frank's food of the week again or whatever it is, because it's just pure shame.
Well, what we could do is you could be like Frank the Tank off of Old School, and we just see you running down the street after dinner.
Hopefully with clothes on.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That would probably be better for everyone in the neighborhood, but it would just be, if you go out for dinner, just have what the plan is, you go out for dinner somewhere where you can walk home, and then you have a brisk walk home, and then you're fine.
Ooh. Yeah. I just don't live near any restaurants. So maybe that is the plan.
Oh man. Wow. That's just not good planning. That's not good. Like there's like no pubs you can stumble home from.
No, nothing I can walk to. No.
Oh, geez. But I'm telling you, like in our neighborhood, we're celebrating because there's this new pub that's just opened up. Like, because when you get old and you get married, it's not like I'm going out to the bar very often anymore. So you need a neighborhood pub that you can go to, and then it's close enough that you can walk home, so you never have to drive. And they've just opened one. There's like one of those new little complexes that comes in. It's got like a gas station, a liquor store, but there's like a pub. And I think the group text message and all our neighbors where we just can't wait till that thing's open. I think it opens up in 3 weeks, and they'll be crushing it for business because we're just starved to go do anything.
Yeah, I know. And the one thing I've learned as I've gotten a little older is the value of day drinking. Like on a weekend, if you can start by like 12, 1 o'clock and be done by 5, you don't feel like hot garbage the next day, in bed by 8 or 9. Like it's perfect.
Well, you've been to England.
I have been to England. Yep.
Because the first time I went with a good friend from school, and we go there. We end up going to a Chelsea game, which is just a whole other experience. It was unreal. But the first time I went to the pub, it's like 7 o'clock. They're like, "Hey, we're going to the pub." And I'm like, "What? 7 o'clock?" Well, you go there and they're crushing beers, and I can't crush beers like they did. So I was hurting the first day. But then the next day we went and I got them to drink rye, which they never did. But it ends at midnight. So you're buckled. Everybody's in bed by like 12:30, and they're all up at 8 o'clock. And you're like, well, now I see it. Because at least in Canada anyway, like the bars are open till 3, last calls at 2, you still have it. And you're just like, you're staying up late. Then you go have some late night donair or whatever. You're not getting home till 4. Of course you can't get up and function in the morning. So the key is to start early and end early.
Yeah. But like, I'm talking end in the afternoon, not even like midnight. Like I'm talking like 5 o'clock, hard cut off, eat dinner and go to sleep.
Oof, geez. I don't have that discipline. If I get on a train wreck, I like to at least last for a bit.
Well, like I think a lot of it, like it's been by accident with golf. Like you play in the afternoon, have a few beers, and then that's it. Like you got to get done, like no hangover the next day. That's all I'm trying to avoid. I know that's like, I sound so insanely old when I say that, but there's nothing worse than that feeling.
Well, the hangover is a bad feeling. Luckily, even in my prime, I never had bad hangovers. Thankfully.
Do you have a hangover aid? Like, if you did get one, what do you like?
Beer and Clamato. Do you guys have Clamato juice?
We actually do, like somewhat recently. Okay. So you like a good red eye?
Dude, I'm telling you, like I would be a little foggy. I would have one, sometimes two. And now, granted, I only drink red eye with like the bad beer. Like I know I'm Canadian, but Molson Canadian is the worst. I don't like that beer at all. I just think it's garbage. So usually if I ever had one of those hanging around the house, I would use it with the red eye, because then it's not about the taste. It's just about getting the Clamato in me. And I would have 1 or 2 of those. Always has to be a lager. Can't have an ale with Clamato. And I'm telling you, man, I was unreal. I'd go to the gym right after. I'd have 1 or 2 of those.
Oh my God. Go to the gym after? What is wrong with you?
You never had a good sweat out after a hangover?
Like maybe in a sauna. I'm definitely not doing anything physical. I'm half dead.
Oh, we used to go on Saturday afternoon at like 4:00 after a Friday night, because then we could go out again Saturday. It felt like, you know what? Now I don't feel guilty.
But like, I think my problem is now it must just be me, but it lasts like 2 days if I get a really bad one.
Well, let's go to who's maybe hung over for trades. I don't think fans ever get tired of talking about trade talk, and every week it seems to have a few different partners in and out. And we talked about this a few weeks ago, Frank. The minute Daryl Sutter got hired in Calgary, I felt like that was a potential new lease on life for Sam Bennett. And now he's on a very specific line, which is what Daryl Sutter does. Jarrett Stoll told us on the podcast how he comes in and tells everybody, this is your role now, and makes the player feel important. And so he's been on the same line ever since. And, you know, he's a hard-nosed player. He's probably a bottom six player at this point. You don't have him on your trade bait board now, but if Calgary's not in it by April 8th, 9th, 10th, do you think Bennett gets moved?
I think there's a chance. You know, the key is Calgary willing to eat some of the contract? And I think that's going to be a big part of the Sam Bennett deal if and when it happens, because he is a proven playoff player. And that is one of the reasons why they hung on to him. I think that's one reason. I think the other reason is that Brad Treliving wasn't going to have a player dictate what happens. They wanted to make a clear stance and stand that they're going to determine who's traded and when. And it wasn't going to be the other way around. And so with Sam Bennett at $2.55 million, you know, the fact that he's an RFA helps. And I think that's one of the big sticking points. When you look at our trade bait board and you look at, there's a lot of UFAs on there, but if you look at some of the players that do have a year or two or more remaining, those teams are not willing to retain salary because they don't want that number on their cap moving forward. So that's going to be a big push and pull with some of these players. And, you know, with Bennett being an RFA, that helps, but still at 2.55 for a bottom six forward, if that's what you believe he is, that's a bigger number than you'd normally want to eat. So if the Flames are indeed out of it and they've got some work to do, the math certainly isn't in their favor, then, you know, they're going to have an interesting decision to make, and they could probably, you know, make it worth their while if they were willing to eat some money.
So now let's stay in the North, and then because we started there, and we'll move around. You look at the, you know, Ken Holland made it very clear he's looking for difference makers. So to me, there's two obvious answers in Edmonton. It's a second pair left defenseman and a second line left winger to play with Draisaitl if Nugent Hopkins stays with McDavid. Those are the two spots. You look at guys who are pure left winger. I don't see a lot that are pure UFAs.
Well, no, I don't either. And that's the thing is, you know, I believe that they're not interested in the rental market, that it would probably have to be a hockey deal that makes sense, given that they don't have the draft picks to be involved in the rental market. They'd probably have to trade a prospect in order to get someone that they're looking for. And, you know, then the next question is, how deep into your prospect pool do you want to dive, given that, you know, you've got some pieces on the way. And by the way, Bakersfield has looked really good, and the numbers there have been really good from their players. You know, it's an interesting scenario that the Oilers are in, because I just don't know that this year makes sense to dive in and do it. You want to sell to Connor McDavid and to Leon Draisaitl that, and your fan base, that you're a team that wants to win and you're in the mix and that you have faith in your group. But at the same time, you have to remember that, you know, there's a bigger picture involved here. And I think that's what Ken Holland has managed really well. And I think next year is the year that the Oilers are really in that position to go do something.
Yeah, I look at the prospects, the guys that don't want to trade, of course, Bouchard, Broberg, Samorikov, I think Ryan McLeod, obviously Holloway. Those would be the main ones. The thing about Bakersfield, really, they only have one defenseman who's on a contract on an NHL deal. That's young Marcus Niemelainen, and I don't think he's that close to playing in the NHL. And Ryan McLeod up front. Marody and Benson have unreal numbers in the AHL. I'm not sure if they have NHL foot speed other than to be fourth liners right now. So that's going to be the challenge for them moving forward.
I wanted to make a point too about some of the AHL numbers this year. And this was brought to my attention yesterday on Thursday after I wrote a story about the NHL and CHL transfer agreement that's up at the end of this year. A lot of people are looking at the AHL differently this year because of the taxi squads, that some of these numbers may be inflated, particularly for guys that have experience playing in the AHL previously. It's a little bit of, you could call it an easier league or more of a prospect league. And so these guys that are, so-called hardened pros that have been in the league for a little while, they're going to be able to find some more success more easily, if I could spit the words out. And I think they're in a position where, maybe some of those numbers are inflated, but either way, I'm not sure that I was expecting that kind of production from Cooper Marody or, and Tyler Benson's always kind of been that consistent scorer, but the numbers all around in Bakersfield are good. And I got to tell you, like, I'm looking at Stuart Skinner too, and I'm saying, what does that mean for the Oilers moving forward?
Well, you know what Edmonton desperately needs, because if you look at teams who win the Stanley Cup, the vast majority of them develop their own goaltenders. You just go back through the last decade, like how many goalies on teams who won the Cup weren't drafted by that team, right? Like, even if you go back to Tuukka Rask, I know he got traded super early in his development from Toronto, a trade that the Maple Leaf fans still don't like many years later, but and he didn't even win. It was Tim Thomas. So you look at, it's just so rare to get a goalie. You can get a good free agent goalie, but does it win you a championship? And that's something to follow. The Oilers have 3 young goalies. We'll see if any of them pan out here in the next few years. Now, the Winnipeg Jets, I saw the Jets last night. Tired team, man. I really like their top 6. They're very good. There's no question about it. I love Lowry as a third line center. They need another defenseman. And you look at Savard, but Columbus is now 2 points out of a playoff spot. And I think they're going to catch Chicago. Chicago's coming back down to earth here a little bit. They had an unreal start, but just without Taves, and although Doc's coming maybe, but I don't think they're going to do it. So I look at Savard and I look at Matthias Ekholm in Nashville. The thing is, if you're going to acquire Matthias Ekholm, he's got another year on his deal, Frank, like, it's going to cost you a lot. And Cheveldayoff historically has been very patient, right? He hasn't jumped in. Like, he obviously made the Line A for Dubois trade, but that's a pretty good player that they're coming back. What do you think the Jets make a significant upgrade on their blue line?
I think they're going to try. Now, whether they pull the trigger or not is a different story, but with a couple of those guys out there, and I wrote this too earlier in the week, just sorting out the buyers and sellers. I even wonder about one of the teams that I included, the Philadelphia Flyers, like the way that their week has gone, the way that the Boston Bruins and that division has shaped up. The Pittsburgh Penguins are playing better. Are you still a firm buyer? So that remains to be seen. But, you mentioned the Jets, and they're a team that I think they're in that window to win. I don't think there's any question about that. And anytime you have Connor Hellebuck playing the way that he has, I think you've got a shot. And so they're missing that stop valve, that shutoff valve in their own zone, where sometimes they get pinned in there for 30, 40, 50 seconds, and they need someone that can break up the cycle and get the puck moving the other way. Ekholm and Savard would fit that bill. But I think this year, the Jets, it all depends on where you're at. There's some teams that prefer the rental, some teams that prefer the term. And I think in most years, most people would prefer the term. But this year in particular, with an expansion draft coming, with so many other things happening cap-wise, a lot of teams would prefer the rental. And I think the Jets are in that group. And to me, Savard would be an absolute perfect fit. Like, you could not draw it up any better in terms of what he brings, how difficult he is to play against, his size, his strength, his playoff experience. And then you're dealing with a cap number that could really be manageable. So for me, if I were to circle a player for the Winnipeg Jets, it would be David Savard. Now, the question is, and you hit it on the head, is, are the Columbus Blue Jackets going to fall out of the race?
No, I don't think so.
I happen to think the Dallas Stars are the team that's in the driver's seat for that 4th and final spot in the Central. Another team that's not in sell mode. They're 4 weeks away from getting Ben Bishop and Tyler Seguin back. And if they could just hang on until then, I know their schedule is murderous. Like, if you look at it on a calendar, it's insane. They have 4 games in 6 days, pretty much the entire rest of the season. So they've got a lot of work to do, but I think numbers wise, games in hand, runway, it's going to be difficult, but the Stars aren't in sell mode. If they have a couple bad weeks, there's going to be teams calling about Jamie Alexiak. They're going to be calling about Andrew Cogliano. They could be calling about Blake Como. So those are three names to watch. But I think if the Stars are close and the price is right, that they could actually be in a position to add and not subtract. So they're one of those teams on our write-up on the trade bait this week that's in the neutral category, not buyers, not sellers at the moment. They're just kind of there. And there's a lot more teams than usual that are like, well, we'll see what happens. Like there's no need to make a decision right now. Let's see where things shake out.
Well, the interesting thing for me about that division is Tampa Bay is going to get Kucherov back at some point. That's like a massive trade deadline acquisition. And so if you're Florida or Carolina and you're really good teams, so, Carolina, Tampa, Florida, you're going to have to beat two of those other teams to get out of your division, right? Unless you're lucky and you finish first. And right now, even Tampa's not a lock to finish first. I'm kind of curious about what Carolina does. They've got a very deep team, so they don't have any glaring weaknesses. But when you look at what Tampa Bay did last year, and they brought in Barclay Goodrow and they brought in Blake Coleman, and not big names, but just good guys to add and fill out their roster, that really helped that team in the playoffs at certain times. Their top gunners were still their guys who led them offensively. But like Carolina, to me, is a fascinating team because they've got a lot of pieces, but they're in a really tough division right now with those three teams. And I wonder if that forces Waddell to be a bit more patient and maybe, wait to see what Tampa does this offseason when they have to unload some guys.
I don't think that's in their DNA. Look, Carolina is in a long competitive window where they're just hoping to get as many kicks at the can as possible. And they're going to be there for a while. So I don't think they're going to be selling off very many future assets. But what I like about Carolina, first off, I love their team. I love their coach, who, by the way, needs a new contract. And I love the fact that their staff with Don Waddell, with Eric Tulsky, with some of the others that they have assembled, that they're willing to be creative and perhaps tinker a little bit more than most to make their team better. And that's whether it's now, whether it's at the deadline, in the offseason, whatever it is, they're not afraid to make changes. I think Don Waddell would trade, just about any player if the deal is right. And there's not many GMs that operate that way. And you think back to last year's deadline, and they were one of the big players. I think it gets lost in the shuffle because we had the pandemic that came right after, but they traded a couple first-round picks. Certainly they got Brady Shea, they got Sammy Vatanen, and then they got Vincent Trocheck. So they moved a lot last year at the deadline. And I wouldn't be surprised to see them tinker again. I think they're interested and in dialogue and in conversation with lots of different teams about lots of different possibilities. But why not? I mean, you're in that division with Tampa Bay, but give them a 7-game series. Like the way that team has played, how difficult they are to play against, I think they could give Tampa a run for their money. And they've shown that this year in their division. It's the other team, Florida, that I just don't know where you go. How, do you think you can knock off both Carolina and Tampa if that's what your schedule dictates? I'm not sure that's the case or that's possible. So lots to think about in Florida, and it's a little bit of a different situation than Carolina.
Well, I do wonder, though, if both Florida and Carolina look and say, we got to add at the deadline, because if we finish first, that's a massive advantage, right? Now you only have to face one of those other teams. I think first place in that division right now, first place in most divisions, but this year, maybe more than ever, what I've liked about the new format this year, it's really separated. It's clear in every division who the top 3 teams are. For the most part, the East, maybe it splits out to 4 or 5, but you're seeing that separation because they're playing each other more often. There's not the surprise factor, maybe of seeing a team that you haven't seen in 5 months, or the fatigue factor. Because usually if you're tired, the guys in your division for the most part are tired, other than that 1 week where, a team gets 4 days off. For the most part, lots of teams are playing, 3 and 4 at different times of the month. So I've really liked how it's kind of separated. Every division, we know who the bottom few teams are. It's pretty clear. And those are the ones who could sell. I'm just not sure how many valuable assets there are on those teams.
Well, I think there's a few on each team. Like Detroit, you've got Luke Glendening, you've got Mark Stahl, Jonathan Bernier, I think is going to be the top goalie on the market. The Sabres is pretty clear with Taylor Hall. I think Colin Miller is an underrated deadline ad on defense. Brandon Montour can skate. New Jersey, you've got a ton. But it's the teams that are kind of in that middle ground that are the neutral teams that have made it a little bit less interesting. Like the Rangers, I don't think they're going to be buying or selling. You've got, the Dallas Stars, they're in that same group that we just talked about. Calgary is another team, probably not buying or selling. They made their big move with the coaching change. I can't, given where they are numbers wise in the standings, I can't imagine that they're going to chase and make a big blow up move at this point. If they're going to reshape their core, it would probably be in the off season. And so you've got that sort of like soft, soupy middle ground. And, the other part, you mentioned the format. The other part I don't like is that by and large, there's not, like, other than the East, there's not really any super tight, crazy playoff race. Like we talked about the Central, there's some work to do for Dallas and Columbus to get back in it. And we'll see if they can. I think they can because Chicago has been playing at a 400, 350 pace for the last couple of weeks. But East is interesting. The West, not so much. There's a clear line, I believe, between St. Louis and LA. And in the North, same thing. I think you're kind of defined at this point with your 4 playoff teams, Toronto, Winnipeg, Edmonton, and Montreal. Calgary's in that next rung down, and can they climb back into it? We'll see, but the playoff races really haven't been that interesting.
Yeah, it's more going to be for the seeding and who plays who. There's no question about that. So let's go to the West. And man, Vegas is dominant. How about this? They haven't lost a game in regulation when they score first. They're 16-0-1. Like, I know scoring first is important, but man, for Vegas, it's almost, let's take a shot. We can pretty much wrap it up. We're going to win the game. That's amazing stat to me out of Vegas. Is Colorado. Colorado, I know that they've had injuries at different times, but
tons of injuries.
Yeah. Like, does that allow them to be patient, or is there's only so many kicks at the cat, Frank? And San Jose probably was they were the best regular season team for 15 years, right? And they only ever got to one cup final and only got to the conference final, I think 2 other occasions. Like, I just look at Colorado, they've got a lot of good players, but they're just, this year, there seems like when I watch the Avs, like there's some nights, like last night, they absolutely dominated Minnesota, who's been playing very well. Mm-hmm. And then other nights, they're barely scraping by San Jose. They're losing to Anaheim. The Avs, to me, of all the top teams, are the most Jekyll and Hyde this year.
I think that's fair. They've been inconsistent. I don't think anyone in Colorado's organization would argue that. But, I mean, their injuries, like the players that you've peeled off of that roster, whether it's for 1 game or 4 games, you take Nathan McKinnon out for 4, you take Cale Makar out for 9 games he's missed or 12 games he's missed. They've had a bunch of guys that have just not been there, and that's really difficult. So, there's like Cale Makar has been a point per game player in the NHL this season, 14 points in 16 games. But you take him out of the mix for a bit, then everyone else suffers. Sam Girard has missed 2 games. So I want to see that team when it's fully healthy. Eric Johnson is obviously out and has been out week to week. Their goaltending situation has been in flux. They've had to ride Philip Grubauer for a long time. Grubauer's played 24 out of their 29 games this year, and his numbers are actually remarkably good, .925 save percentage considering that. But still, I'm going to reserve judgment on Colorado until they're completely healthy. And until then, I
think Bernier's a fit there, Frank, simply because Grubauer, historically, teams, if you overuse your goaltender in the regular season, outside of Vasilevsky, they haven't had success come playoff time lately. Holtby, kind of lost his job temporarily, didn't even start the playoffs, then went on a run. Fleury and Murray switched it. Binnington didn't even come to the NHL till halfway through. Like, I think if I'm Colorado, it's rare that we see goaltenders get dealt at the deadline that are impact guys, but I think Bernier, to me, is a perfect fit for that organization because they can't keep running Grubauer, especially in a condensed schedule. I think they'll burn him out before the playoffs.
Not only that, but they know Bernier. He played a year there, 17, 18. They know what he's like. His numbers were good that year, and he's been so good this year for the Red Wings. He has 8 of their 9 wins. His numbers are good on a bad team. And so his cap hit's manageable. He's a pending UFA. Like, why not Jonathan Bernier? I would take a flyer on Bernier long before I would Devin Dubnyk.
Oh yeah, 100%. I've watched a lot of the Sharks games, and Doobie's been either really good or some nights not so good at all. Vegas, they've got a lot. I'm not sure.
They need a center.
I still think if they could add like a legit score, that would really help their team. I'm not sure there's out there. But the Islanders, like the one match made in heaven that just seems obvious because of cap space and the injury to Anders Lee is Hall going to Long Island, because like Anders Lee, that's a huge blow for that team who's playing well. And Lou historically, he knows how important it is. And they've talked about their culture there in Long Island, and Trotz has got them playing well. That division, I think, there's no, like, Washington's not the dominant cup team. Pittsburgh's not the dominant cup team. I think the Islanders almost they're have to look at Hall.
They have as good a shot to win that division as anyone. And the way they play defense and the way Barrie Trotz has them going, like, he's right there for coach of the year for me again. You just want to see Hall and Eberle together again, don't you?
Well, I'm not even sure they'd play in the same line. Hall would probably play with Barzal though.
Just hanging out together though. You just want to see them reunited.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny, Frank. I'm probably like the one guy who, it's usually like because people, they get emotionally attached to players and they want them to come back to their team. And I'm like, dude, I always make the joke. How many people get divorced who get back together and it works out, right? Like, you break up with your girlfriend, you break up with your boyfriend.
Never works out.
And then 3 months later, you're like, you see them out. And, oh, well, hey, because you only remember the good stuff. You don't remember the reason you broke up. And so, now Hall and Eberle, it's a little bit different because they never played in Long Island. They played in Edmonton together for a long time.
And they also didn't make the decision to break up, right?
That's true. So, the benefit for Lou is he could go to Eberle and ask him everything he needs to know about Taylor Hall, right?
Yeah.
So they'd probably give him a fairly accurate assessment of who he is.
And I still don't understand for the life of me why the Buffalo Sabres in any world would consider re-signing Taylor Hall.
Why would Hall consider it?
No, well, I get Hall's perspective is he doesn't want to keep moving around. He wants to set down roots, but go somewhere and increase your value. The stink of Buffalo is wafting over every player on that team. It's actually hard to evaluate guys. How much of an impact can a Colin Miller or a Brandon Montour be? Because the team is so bad. Oh. So for me, I'd want to get out of there as soon as possible. Put aside the security, go somewhere and increase your value, play well in the playoffs, make a name for yourself again, get back to that Hart Trophy level if it exists, if you can get back there. And make a statement on a good team and go into the summer feeling good about yourself and your situation. And then you bring it to the fact, what sense does it make for the Sabres? Where are they going? Why do you need to re-sign Taylor Hall at a big ticket for a team that's nowhere close to competing, and hamstring yourself with another contract that makes no sense? I don't get it at all. Recoup assets. And if, let's say, you love Taylor Hall, you think he's a centerpiece to your franchise, re-sign him in the summer. You don't need him now.
Yeah. Oh, I'd agree wholeheartedly. I think if I'm Taylor Hall, though, I think just mentally, he's got to go to a franchise that's just a stable franchise. You look at the franchises he's played for when he went to them, they've all been bad franchises. Edmonton was a tire fire for a long time. New Jersey wasn't very good. Arizona, we saw Katie Strang's article about them. So, in Buffalo now, you just go to a stable organization. And when you've made that much money, you can afford to go on a short-term deal, a little bit lower money, and go there and win and have fun and just kind of be in a stable organization. I think that's what he needs to do. And that would help him for sure. But you got to think teams would be looking at him. The problem is, even if Buffalo eats half his salary, it's still it's still $4 million in actual, not in actual money, but $4 million in what his salary is. So that'll be challenging. But now,
but the Islanders have that space now.
Oh no, they do
with Lee. And I'll tell you who was disappointed by that Lee injury, aside from the Islanders and the Lee camp, is the Chicago Blackhawks, a team that is actively involved in discussions with teams about being that broker to help get deals done at the deadline with their cap space. They were looking at the Islanders as one of those teams that they were going to need to help, because the Islanders didn't have any space before the Lee injury. They had nothing. And now they're in a position where they don't need any help with LTIR. They can just fit in upwards of $7 million that they need.
Yeah, well, you look at possible three-way deals involving Chicago taking. Say, I'll be curious how the NHL monitors that. There's nothing that says you can't do it, but
No, look, it's perfectly legal. The Toronto Maple Leafs did it last year. They got a 5th-round pick in exchange for helping that Leonard deal go through. You think of the Leafs as a team with no cap space. They utilized what little they had left to essentially buy a 5th-round pick for, I think it was $254,000.
Yeah.
That's what they ate in terms of the Leonard deal. So Leonard went from Chicago to Toronto and then to Vegas. And now the Leafs are in a position where they're asking teams now, including Chicago, are you interested in helping us broker a deal if we need it?
So if a 5th rounder was $254,000 in cap space, so does it go up by increments of 250? Is it, if you're eating 750, is it a 3rd rounder? I'll be curious to see because there's not really a market for that.
Well, there's nothing defined, but incrementally as you go up, a 1st-round pick isn't going to be worth 5 times that. It might be worth 10 or whatever that is. You think back to the Carolina Hurricanes essentially buying a 1st-round pick to eat the Patrick Marleau deal. Right. So I think a couple things have changed. I know that's what the Leafs were asking around about. Would you help us broker a deal for a 5th-round pick? And my belief is with the financial constraints this year, that cost has gone up a bit.
Oh yeah. I was just going to say, I don't think it's the same as last season, because of last season, there at the time of the trade deadline, no one was even thinking
pandemic, right,
about COVID. Now, speaking of teams playing bad, Frank, and I know it's only one game, but the New York Rangers coach isn't on the bench, and they absolutely spank the Flyers. Like, it was 9-0 after
they
40
mauled
minutes.
them.
Like, it wasn't. I was watching that game and I was just like, oh my goodness. Like, it's the old Rocky meme, throw in the towel, because it was just like 40 minutes of 9-0. It was crazy. And Zibanejad, it was just like every shift in the second period he's scoring. But maybe that was just one. But I do wonder if there's something there, like for a team to play that well without their coach, like, I got to see how the Rangers respond here. But if all of a sudden their next few games, like, I'm just kind of like, it just makes me wonder if where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah, it raised an eyebrow for me for sure. And I think there were some rumblings about David Quinn before the coaching staff had COVID-19, or there was some contact tracing or whatever was required for them to miss these number of games. I think a lot of people were asking questions about whether David Quinn was in trouble, just because the Rangers went through such a listless stretch this year.
Yeah.
And in fact, they were saved a couple games by playing a team like the Buffalo Sabres, where they kind of got out of the mix and started to look and play a little bit better. But, for me, if I'm working in Ranger management, I'm looking at these couple games this weekend, how they play under Chris Knobloch, who has gotten rave reviews for guys that have played under him. How energized is this team? You could put aside the 9-0 because that never happens. And the Flyers were so inexplicably bad that, that wasn't exactly a 9-0 game. Every single bounce went in for the New York Rangers. That never happens. But I couldn't help but wonder and see how energized that team was. And if that continues, does making a coaching change, you never want to have the inmates run the asylum, but does making a coaching change put the Rangers in a better position to take that next step more quickly? Because they were all as competitive as they've been this year. I think they were all hoping they'd be in sort of the next rung up in terms of the competitive level. They've been better of late, but I think there's still more that they can get to. And I think David Quinn has developed a reputation as, I don't know if hard ass is the right word, but a guy who is willing to sit players for bad shifts. There's not a lot of rope with David Quinn. And if, it's one bad shift, you're sitting on the bench, 3 bad shifts, you're a healthy scratch the next game. These are professionals that have played, a few hundred games in the NHL. It's not, you don't treat players that way. And so I think they've been upset about that. Every coach has his own style. And I think, if you get any sort of coaching change, even if it's just for a couple games, people get excited. Players always get excited with a coaching change. So we'll see what happens there, but that's on my radar 100%.
What about Tony DeAngelo? It seems like any talks have pretty much evaporated.
Nothing new. They tried to get him somewhere on an AHL loan. I don't see anything happening there unless there's a decimating injury to a contender.
So a likely buyout at a third of the price come summertime.
Yep, because he's under 26, third of the price, which makes it easy. And that's also what's made this deal difficult is you're dealing with one of the few NHL teams that is so financially sound that they can say, hey, pal, go sit on your thumb for the rest of the year. We have no problem eating this $4.8 million. And by the way, because we can buy you out for 1/3, we're going to be really careful about how we handle this transaction money-wise. They're only willing to eat whatever that buyout cost if they retain salary, because they don't want to get stuck with more than that following into the next season.
Now let's get to our buy and sell as we bring in producer Tyler. Ty, how you doing, my man?
I am good, Jason. I am good. I'm excited for another edition of Buy or Sell. I got some good questions ready to go. As always, Buy and Sell brought to you by JockMarket, JockMKT.com. If you're down in the States, it is live. And you guys were talking about that Rangers beatdown on the Flyers. In that game, Mika Zibanejad's stock started at $4 and the final payout was $25. Can you imagine if you bought 10 shares of Mika Zibanejad before that game? That's over, I think the number 602% is how much it went up. Also, another one that caught my eye. They sent me some numbers from their contest the other night. When Tyson Barrie had his 4 points against the Calgary Flames, his share price was $1.79 to start. It paid out at $16. So there's some money to be made over with our friends at JockMarket. If you're down in the States, you can find their app on whatever app store you use. And if you use the promo code DFO20, you get a $20 deposit bonus.
Boom. You put in that deposit, you're using Barrie and Zibanejad, and you are walking away big money right there.
Oh, yeah. All right, let's get to the first question. And this one comes from our Instagram at Devinism16 on Instagram. He says John Tortorella will be the head coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets next season. Frank, are you buying or selling on Torts sticking around in CBJ?
Selling. I think they're happy with how he's helped that franchise get on the map. I mean, before Jarmo Kekalainen and John Tortorella, the Blue Jackets were a perennial joke, and I think they're appreciative of that. But the fact that he didn't sign an extension before the season, there's some question as to whether the Blue Jackets weren't able to financially with the pandemic or Torts didn't want to. I don't know the real answer there, but the way this season has played out, really disappointing for a team that I thought, as competitive as they've been and as competitive as they were last year, should have been an easy top 4 playoff team in that division, and it hasn't happened.
Oh, I'm selling all day long on that one. I think Tortorella, he's had a great run in Columbus. Lots of good coaches they just need a change of pace. It's been the same voice there for a long, long time. And you got Line A you want to re-sign. You've got Seth Jones coming up. I just think they're going to need to make a change. And I think they've got a roster that's attractive where, obviously every job coaches want, but let's be honest, you're a free agent coach. Could I go to Buffalo or can I go to Columbus? It's night and day. So the openings that are there, I think Columbus, any coach you go after who's available will be highly interested. There's a lot of really good players on that roster.
Number 2, guys, I'm itching for a deal. I want to see a big trade. So number 2, we will see our first significant trade by next Friday's episode of the DFO Rundown. Gregor, you think we get a deal in the next 7 days here?
Yeah, sadly, I'm selling on that. And I love trades. I'd love to see it prematurely. I could see why it makes sense. The caveat I'll say is maybe Toronto because of I thought Toronto, if they were going to do the trade, it would be now. They're only playing 2 games in 10 days. Now, they could have got the quarantine done, but it hasn't happened. So I'm going to say no, only because I just think that the Leafs kind of missed their window and teams are going to wait. They're going to wait as long as they can, just because that saves them having to take on the money of the player they acquire.
There's no caveats here. What are you talking about? I'm buying. There's going to be a trade in the next week, I think. If it's not the Leafs, it's going to be someone else. The quarantine's in play. I think everyone's curious to see whether the quarantine changes. I reported again on Thursday that the NHL is awaiting word from the Canadian federal government if they can knock it down from 14 days to 7. We'll see if that happens or not. But still, I think everyone's looking at the calendar here saying, if I'm going to pull the trigger and if I'm going to spend these assets, I might as well get a few extra games out of these guys. And I think we're going to see a trade over the next week.
And on that note, Frank, as a Canadian, just grab some common sense here, people. 7 days. And it's not, I'm trying to look for favoritism for the NHL. These guys are getting tested.
They're getting tested every day, and they might also be vaccinated. It actually makes no logical sense.
No.
We're throwing logic out the window. Not I don't have an MD. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a virologist, but this is insane. They're getting tested every day. And if they're flying privately from one destination to another, from their hermetically sealed bubble to another, then they're in a position where at some point in those 7 days, if you are positive and you have COVID, that it will show up in those 7 days. And if not, let them free into their own cohort.
Yeah, I agree.
Getting fired up there. Number 3. You guys danced around this a little bit earlier on, but I'm saying David Savard will be a Winnipeg Jet by the trade deadline. Frank, are you buying or selling? Yeah, making you give me a firm answer. It's hard.
I'm going to buy. I think that's the one guy that just makes perfect sense for them. I don't know what the cost is. I don't even know what the cost to re-sign him is. I think it's probably something that the Jets could afford if they'd want to. And there's no doubt that I think they've been scouting the Columbus Blue Jackets. Their AGM, Larry Simmons, has certainly been at games. I think Savard makes too much sense and is such a good fit. I'm going to buy that he is a Jet.
A few weeks ago, I would have bought this, but I'm going to sell. I think Chicago has come back. Columbus is now within 2 points as we speak today of getting in that playoff race. And I just think Dallas is going to run out of gas by playing so many games. And Columbus, I think they'll have confidence in themselves. You get in the playoffs and anything can happen, as they proved last year. So I'm going to sell. I think David Savard stays with Columbus because by the 12th, I think they'll be in a playoff spot.
So real quick, though, if you're Jarmo Kekalainen, which of those teams ahead of you in the Central are you beating? If you're finishing in the 4th spot, you're likely to face Tampa. You've already gone through a couple years where you went sort of all in, so to speak. You lost a bunch of free agents that walked at the end of the year. They haven't had any discussions with David Savard to this point on re-signing him. Can you honestly make the argument that Savard and Nick Foligno make sense to keep just in case you get in?
No, it's a good argument. Teams historically have never kind of thrown up the white flag to their team if they think they're close and if they're in a playoff spot. So it's because they're in a playoff spot. Had they been even 3-4 points out, then I think they would have made the deal, but I don't think they will. The other thing about Savard that's interesting, Frank, like look at how many pending UFAs haven't had any negotiations with teams. Like I think this is the flat cap. I think we're going to see shorter terms than we ever have in the offseason. People are always worried about overpaying because that's usually where you do it in free agency. I think we might actually have some spending restraint this offseason.
Number 4 in buy and sell, the LA Kings. They're just 3 points back of the St. Louis Blues in that Western playoff race. They also have a game in hand. So if they win it, they could be only a point back. I'm going to say Todd McClellan and the LA Kings find a way to get hot and sneak into the playoffs. Gregor, are you buying or selling?
You know what's funny? Because that's the one team. I know Frank was talking about the playoff races. You know, they've found their way to stay in that race. They've gotten good goaltending from Cal Peterson when he's in. Drew Doughty and Anze Kopitar are drinking from the fountain of youth this year. Same with Dustin Brown. So they've got that veteran leadership. They've got some young kids, and something just seems amiss in St. Louis this year.
How about their injury report?
Yeah, no, that's true. But they've also just been horrific at home, right? Like it's kind of weird. I know there's no crowds. Well, at least there's just started to be some, but I don't know if LA makes it, but I think LA is a team that won't make a big splash, but I think they're going to try to add a little piece. They've got tons of tons of really good prospects. I think they can afford to give up a 2nd or a 3rd round pick to kind of just add some juice to their team at the deadline. I don't think they make it, but I think LA does make a trade to try to boost their team at the deadline.
Sell all day long. No, I don't see any chance that this happens. And I'm happy for you to record this and play it again at a later date. St. Louis Blues just got Tarasenko back. Think of all the guys that have been out of their lineup. Barbashev, Robert Thomas, Colton Parayko, Jaden Schwartz. Go down the list. It's been insane. That team has dealt with more injuries than almost any other. And yet they're still squarely in the mix. I think the Blues are going to get these guys back. And if they can all stay together for a few games, they're going to take off. I think the Blues actually finish potentially ahead of the Minnesota Wild in that 3rd spot. And that's the way I see it shaping up. And I don't see any way in which the Los Angeles Kings are adding at the deadline. I think their one goal is to re-sign Alex Iafallo at some point, whether it's now or before he hits free agency. They've been in discussion, but they're in a position where I don't see them adding. They're a neutral team at the deadline, not buying or selling.
Last buy or sell question of the week. I talked about him off the top and his performance against the Calgary Flames the other day, but Tyson Barrie, heard on Insider Trading, Ken Holland might start some negotiations with him. I'm not sure if there's a fit here next year. I think Tyson Barrie might price himself out of the range of the Edmonton Oilers. I'm saying Tyson Barrie will not be an Edmonton Oiler next year. Jason, what do you say?
Oh, man, this is a hot topic in Edmonton.
Oh, it
Fans
is.
Are fired
Is
up.
it ever?
All of a sudden, second assists don't count in the NHL. What a ridiculous statement.
Cheesy apples.
But anyway, see, here's the thing. Tyson Barrie, in the last 8 years in the NHL, is the 7th highest scoring defenseman in the league. He's been an elite point producer everywhere he goes. And now he's teamed up in Edmonton with the best 2 scorers in the league. So of course, like, he's an elite offensive guy. I get that he's not great defensively, so I'm not going to pay him. But if I could get Tyson Barrie at 3 years between 5 to 5.5 million, I would sign that for Edmonton, because now it's all about term for me. So I do think there's a fit here. I don't know Tyson Barrie well enough to say, is he looking for a big payday? He's made good money, but in a flat cap, are teams going to suddenly grossly overpay him? I don't think so. So I think there is a fit for the Edmonton Oilers, but it depends on term. It's really the term. Even if I had to squeeze up to 6, I wouldn't love it. But if I got it on a 3-year deal, I would punch that ticket if I'm Ken Holland, because Tyson Barrie has been proven for years to be an elite puck-moving defenseman.
100% agree. I think he's fit like a glove. I've always thought that Tyson Barrie would fit like a glove, going back to when he was available for trade from the Colorado Avalanche. He was a guy that, you hit everything right on the head. Elite point producer, exactly what they needed on their power play, fits so well with the scores that they have. And he's got his confidence back. That was the biggest thing. That was my question mark. The only question mark for me with Tyson Barrie was, could he find a way to get that confidence back? And he has. And I think he just doesn't make any sense. When someone fits, he's young enough. Term is going to be everything, but I think he stays.
There you go. That is another edition of Buy or Sell, brought to you by Jock Market. Check them out, JockMKT.com. It's launching soon in Canada, but if you're down in the States, download it wherever you get your apps from. Promo code DFO20 gets you that $20 deposit bonus.
It's awesome. Thanks, Ty. And that's a lot of fun, man. If you can get on the stocks on a guy who you think's going to have a big night, it's really worth it. Zibanejad going from like $4 up to 20. That's a huge hit. Frank, we got a lot to discuss this week. I look forward to next Friday, because every week it gets closer. I think we get another 3 games, in some cases 4 for some teams, out of the way, and we'll find out who's legitimately needing it. And the other wild card in all of this is, if a team gets a major injury here in the next few weeks, it's a contender, that changes everything. And maybe suddenly they become more of a buyer. So we'll look forward to that. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you Monday.
Sounds good. Have a good weekend.
Thanks for listening to the DFO Rundown with Seravalli and Gregor. Keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from to never miss an episode.